Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back. We got another episode coming your way. Raw of Faith. This is actually going to be episode 3. Decided to throw the 96-hour fast into episode 2. While emotions hot around that, everybody's kind of asking about it. That way I can just use that to answer the questions I get. People texting me and such. But yeah, so episode 3 today, we are going to be kind of piggybacking off of episode 1, talking about porn. But today we're going to be talking about the difference between love and lust, and kind of how lust is it's the originator of, the struggles with porn. It's the originator of the thought process, the thought patterns, the, originator of a lot of failed relationships for myself and for Matt. So I think it's just a extremely valuable topic. It's something that him and I are both experiencing right now, in premarital, relationships. We're not married yet, obviously building up into a godly marriage. So doing it the right way. So we're going to be diving into that, our experience there, just, what those boundaries have looked like for us, how that kind of roller coaster has gone, at least for me. Curious to hear about your experience. I know we've talked about it a little bit, but I know there's a lot of young guys, especially guys inside of Elevator, who are asking these questions around, where are the boundaries before marriage? Like, how can I really ensure, a godly marriage? And that's what we're trying to do as well. So we just wanted to jump on here, dive into love and lust from our understanding and what we've researched and understood about the Bible. Just have a fruitful conversation. So, Matt, what's going on, brother?
Morning, man. I like the grateful cup back at it for part 2. I'll take a sip with you.
Got the soup bowl, man. Cheers.
Yeah, for sure.
Another thing I got over here, ever since I broke the 96-hour fast with a fruit smoothie, dude, I've been like craving them. Like, they're so good. And so I got a little cocoa powder, blueberries, raspberries, honey, little ice cream sandwich protein powder, little milk, little Greek yogurt. So got the smoothie going. But for everybody, it's kind of funny. I was blending this thing at 5:30 a.m. I was like, my neighbors are probably so mad. For everybody watching, it's about a little after 6 over here my time. We're recording this Saturday morning, up early grinding, man. But yeah, I was blending this thing up. I was like, ooh, neighbors are probably upset. So out of courtesy, I actually stopped early. So I got a little bit of fruit chunks in here, which I may start doing on a regular.
Nice. And I like you got the Greek yogurt in there too. I was going to say, I love putting kefir as like the liquid base in smoothies. Get the probiotic in too, but you got the Greek yogurt flowing.
Yeah, it's a little thicker. I did a splash of milk and I did a little water too. Probably should have done a little more water. Because it's a bit thick. It's about a yogurt consistency.
Okay.
But it's a little runnier than yogurt, but it's pretty good. We're dialing it in. I'm about to order Tani and I we're about to order a supplement stack. So we're kind of scheming on what supplements we want to try out. We got to get the foundational stuff, creatine, magnesium. But scheming on what's next. So excited to keep dialing in the smoothies, add some supplements, and just take the health to the next level.
Nice, man. I give you props being able to rip a smoothie and a coffee in the same sip, like back to back, like that. The taste for me would be a little questionable going back and forth.
Dude, I got a water right here too, but I'm always ripping 3 drinks, man. Like, I've been doing it for so long now. It just feels like something's wrong if I don't have different drinks going on. So I really think, I'll make this point and we'll dive into the love lust stuff. But I really think, like, I was talking to Andrew Bethel and I was telling him, because he was talking about like work environments and being able to be more productive. So we were talking about that because he works from home, as do I. And I was telling him, I was like, I think the 3 drinks really helped me, 3 different flavors. I usually got lime water, some sort of fruit thing, whether it's like a sparkling fruity water, and then coffee. I said, I think the 3 drinks really helped me because when you hit a creative block, you seek dopamine. And I think where people really fall short when they hit a creative block is they seek dopamine and they turn to their phone. And then their work block is done. That deep work is over. So if you're in a deep work block and you're seeking, you hit a creative block, something you're trying to work through, figure out, you can seek dopamine by changing flavors of drink. Where I can get a sip of coffee, kind of bitter, really grounds me as I'm just flowing, get some coffee, kind of got that placebo, the caffeine, and the little actual effects of the caffeine. And then, I hit that creative block, I turn to something fruity, kind of get that dopamine of that flavor rush. And then it just helps me work, and it kind of just like creates these creative pathways for me, helps me really work around creative blocks. So he said this is an entire like scenario and scene you have just painted in your head. He's like, it might be working, but he's like, you've convinced yourself that it works. That's why it works. I was like, nah, I think it's real, man. I think there could be some psychology behind this.
No, I do like that. I like that. I'm just thinking back to my days too. Definitely keep that in mind.
For sure, man. I mean, it's huge. So, but all right, without further ado, let's dive in. I mean, everybody listening, like if they listen to episode 1, we kind of got the coffee talk in there. So, we got to just catch up a little bit, break the ice a little bit, some small talk, but let's dive right in here. So, one thing I want to start off reading is something that I came across not too long ago within the Everyman's Bible. Highly recommend everyone picking up this Bible. It's on Amazon. I think it's like $40. I don't know, but it's a nice Bible. Easy to understand, provides you a ton of great context. Shout out them. But I came across this thing from 2 Samuel 13. It's just a little like excerpt kind of explaining the scripture of 2 Samuel 13. And it's literally the difference between love and lust. And I thought it was just perfect for this episode. So I'm going to read through this, and then we're going to kind of go from there based on our experiences, etc. But what's the difference between love and lust? The answer makes a huge difference, as David's oldest son, Amnon, found out only too late. When Amnon, the oldest son of David, and Ahinoam grew to adulthood, he couldn't help but notice his beautiful half-sister, Tamar, the daughter of David and Maachah. The more he looked, the more he wanted her. Soon he convinced himself that he had fallen madly in love with his lovely young relative. He was so obsessed by her beauty that eventually he made himself sick. When his cousin Jonadab asked him to explain his odd affliction, he replied mournfully, "I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." Really? The events that soon followed revealed the disastrous error in his self-diagnosis. Jonadab, a very crafty friend, according to the Bible, suggested to Amnon that he really did not have as hopeless a problem as he imagined. So long as Amnon already looked sick, why not go all out and appear deathly ill? Then, when the king looked in on him, he could suggest that he'd feel much better if his father, King David, sent Tamar to fix him some dinner. David, suspecting nothing, agreed to Amnon's request. But when the young woman arrived, Amnon excused all servants and quickly made it plain that Tamar was the only dish on his menu. Tamar tried to stop her half-brother from violating her, but he used his greater strength to overpower and rape her. And that's when his love showed its true character. "Get out of here," he shouted at her. The Bible says that suddenly Amnon's love turned to hate, and he hated her even more than he had loved her. Of course, Amnon's vile behavior showed that he never loved Tamar at all. And this is probably my favorite line out of this entire thing, explaining the difference between love and lust right here. Love always wants the best for the beloved, while lust merely demands satisfaction for itself. We're going to dive deeper into that. In raping and then rejecting his half-sister, Amnon showed himself to be a lust-driven predator, not really in love at all. Amnon's sin ignited a slow-burning fuse that eventually detonated a family time bomb. Tamar's brother Absalom hated Amnon deeply because what he had done to his sister. And 2 years later, he engineered his killing. A few years after that, Absalom led a rebellion against his father, whom he apparently never forgave for allowing his sister to be raped. Never underestimate the enormous difference between lust and love. Do whatever it takes to distinguish between the two. And take great care to avoid former and nurture the latter. Remember the Apostle Paul's wise instruction. God's will is for you to be holy, so stay away from all sexual sin. Then each of you will control his own body and live in holiness and honor, not in lustful passion like the pagans who do not know God in his ways, which is referring to 1 Thessalonians 4. But a lot to definitely unpack there. But, I love that line of love always wants best for the beloved, while lust merely demands satisfaction for itself. And I think that's ultimately, what this whole conversation boils down to one line there. So I guess from reading that, I'll give you the floor. Like, what's your takeaways from that?
Yeah, man. I think first and foremost, the first call we talked a little bit about David and Bathsheba, got into that story, and this is kind of the follow up to that. I didn't go down the list of consequences that David and just his family would experience. But on the previous call, I had mentioned, hey, like one thing we just have to acknowledge is sin does have consequences, and you're seeing a lot of what those consequences can be. I know these are different people, not necessarily David and Bathsheba. So these people are still making their own choices. But it's just crazy how just such a renowned character, David, this is the path that him and his family have gone down here as a result of lust, and just how far away you can get from God as a result of these actions that Amnon was taking. Just things like the lust, anger, hate, like just a lot of things that through kingdom lenses, what we try and learn from faith, like we want to not have those things be a part of our life. And then the other big thing for me is just like as a guy, like the responsibility in those situations with godly women, like goes to a whole new level. Like the strength, just us being guys, like I think there's just that added layer of responsibility being like, hey, like we can assert ourselves in a different way, and we need to make sure that our beliefs and thoughts are checked all the time, like it was mentioned in here. Like make sure you're constantly checking for this, because of what Amnon did to Tamar.
Yeah, no, that's like, from a female's perspective in today's world, something I can't even begin to understand, but it's got to be just a whole different thought, like the safety aspect, like, so I think especially, for me, and anyone out there listening that's really trying to cultivate, premarital love, I think a big piece of it is like security when it comes to that area of life. Like, the female in your case, in my case, she really needs to feel safe in that setting, comfortable in that setting. So I think that that's something to definitely consider. And I think that, withholding the premarital boundaries is going to be so big for setting up that foundation of security to last a lifetime of a godly marriage. But yeah, I mean, just so much to unpack here. I think it's crazy how, and it's relatable, right? Like this is relatable where Amnon, he's trying to get with this girl. It's kind of weird that it's his half sister. I'll just throw that out there. Dress that elephant, kind of sus, but whatever. But his friend, I believe, his cousin, Jonadab, helping him, says a very crafty friend is what it says. Helping him is similar, relatable to our current, landscape of guys. Oh, I'm trying to pick her up. You got the wingman helping you out, whatever. Like, it's just an extremely relatable scenario. Obviously, not relatable up to the point where he overpowers and rapes her. That's just absolutely absurd. But it's just, we've all, I think as guys, we can relate to this experience, right? That's what I'm trying to get across. I hope you cannot relate to raping somebody. I can't relate to that. But if you can, that's your own kind of bottle to unpack and deal with there, really leaning into God's grace. You're never too far gone. I'll say that. But just, yeah, I mean, it's so real. It is just so real. And I think like in the beginning, I really wanted to point out what he's saying about like he essentially had talked himself into loving Tamar. Like how he didn't even like really know her, it didn't seem like, just seemed like he had admired her beauty from afar. And like then he's just madly in love with her, he's telling people, so like I can definitely relate to that in my past, struggling with lust, of just like clinging to women who are just extremely attractive and just, convincing myself that I am, into them like so deeply. And it was really just out of, I think, my flesh just being so in control that it was kind of controlling my thought patterns in my mind of just like, you're into her. Like, you love her. Like, even willing to tell girls that I love them, just to be able to get them into the bedroom. Like, and so that, and it wasn't something that like, I think I was even, I guess I was consciously doing it, but it was something where, falling into porn at 11, falling into what I would even consider a sexual addiction in my life at some point. Um, I mean, I really started having sex at 14. So just, I mean, a lot, a long time there for me. And so it was something where I was just so deeply embedded in those thoughts and in that I didn't even know I was, subconsciously just doing that all for one end goal. Um,
Mhm.
and so I don't know, for me, just reading through this, like I could relate again, all the way up into the point where he raped her. I'd never done that in my life, but I could just relate to this thought process of what he's doing, talking himself into loving this girl, getting his friend, kind of crafting up a scene where he can, you know, trick her essentially into coming into his presence. Like, just crazy story there, man.
For sure. Oh, so many good points. Um, and I think just one thing I kind of thought of as because a lot of people are gonna maybe shake their heads a little bit at the whole half sister thing, like just the
Huh.
way society's raised and stuff. But like, all right, I totally get it. Um, I guess the one note I'll make in terms of just the pornography side, like the best way I can put this is like you can find anything you want when it comes to searching those types of sites, and you
And
could
I
end
did.
up right. You could end up in a place where you never thought you would end up. And I think that has some brain dopamine side of things to it as well. Just as you continue to watch porn for a longer and longer amount of time, your brain's just going to crave um, just elevated levels of things
Yeah.
without going into it too deep. But yeah, you can. What you might have thought was, oh yeah, like I'll never end up there. Like you could, just like what Amnon did, almost like convince yourself that this is okay. Like you can be watching something and basically be like, oh, like okay, I'm experiencing this,
Yeah.
um, and it just completely throws your actual reality for like a complete loop. Because then when you're done with watching or doing whatever you got to do, like then you go live real life again, but you're still bringing those thought patterns into the real world.
Yeah.
So it's that's a huge problem for me when it comes to the things that you can find, um like the different genres, I guess you can say, when it comes to pornography.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, not like in my life, I'll just be completely raw and real. Like I absolutely was watching all kinds of genres, I guess we're gonna call it.
Yeah.
So I mean, not to make a joke out of it because it's very real, but yeah, like you're saying, and you will continue to just make it more and more kinkier, varied, whatever it is, like,
Right.
multiple girls, whatever. Like you will continue to just head down that rabbit hole of needing something more to stimulate you the
Right.
more you watch porn. And I've actually talked to Joe about this, and he's saying he thinks that a lot of like the porn kind of rabbit hole we're talking about, maybe could be pointed the finger at people turning gay, essentially. This may get me canceled sharing this. Hopefully, YT doesn't take it down. But he's saying, you go down that rabbit hole, and eventually you're, finding yourself watching some, two guys or two women if you're a female, or like you find yourself doing that, and then even in your own, how we talked about in the last episode, like you can't really differentiate what you're watching from it being real life. So you watch enough hours of that, you program yourself that you're attracted to that for enough hours, and that's the only thing that can get you up, I guess. Like,
Mhm.
in real life, that may be your reality before you know it. So and I don't know if there's any, it seems like I could, from my experience, having gone down the porn rabbit hole for so many years, like I could very easily see that being a truth. Now, do I have any like psychological or any evidence to back that? I don't, but I just, from my experience and from talking with other guys, like we all agreed that like we could very easily see that being a path. Now, have I talked to anyone, who is gay, and confirmed that from them? No, absolutely not. So, but it is crazy just to really, get real around that porn rabbit hole, because I know there's somebody listening right now who might be in the middle of that, who's watching some stuff that they're like, wow, I'm in a pinwheel of, string that I got to unwind here that I didn't ever see myself get tangled up in. And yeah, I was there. Absolutely. I know you were probably there as well. So it's something where, like we talked about in episode one, it's that war, right? It's that war. It's day to day. It's decision by decision. Like that's how you're going to unwind that tangled mess you got yourself into what you're watching. It's not watching, less stimulating things. I think it's day to day trying to do everything you can not to fall into it as a whole. Reprogramming those inputs, everything we talked about in episode one. So if you are in that spot, I just want to open the door to reach out to one of us, reach out to Matt, reach out to myself. You can find us both on Twitter. We'd love to just get vulnerable with you and have that conversation, because it's a real spot. There's no doubt about that. I've definitely been there.
Yeah, man. I think it's a good segue just being in episode two. You start going to war with the habit, just with watching pornography, wanting to move away from that, move on from that. But you kind of peel the onion back a couple more layers, and it's like, okay, now you got to look at your heart. You got to look at this concept of lust and love, which is really the overarching, like, just belief system, identity, that then it directly impacts your pornography watching and just how you're thinking day to day. So it's I think we've had a really good transition into kind of like what this path looks like. What you may start as, all right, like I'm just going to stop watching porn. Like it's going to turn into these sorts of conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This is like the next level. Yeah, the next layer down. Like this is what you have to start looking at as you're coming out of porn, addressing kind of the root. I think another piece, before I really come off of that conversation about porn specifically, going back to Amnon, raping Tamar, like I think it's something also where you see, um, you see in porn, women get so objectified that, you know, Amnon physically overpowering her in this scenario. Like you see it, women getting objectified. So it's like it can make it your reality too, in real life. So it's just a crazy thought what we're saying with that rabbit hole.
Yeah. I just, it's such a crazy belief system that like, what you're watching and just the where, like we talked about on the first call, walking into the gym and the thought patterns you have. Even just like, church and just like all these situations you go into, these circumstances in real life, just how something you're doing behind closed doors could be directly impacting all of your experiences in real life, which is exactly what you just talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, let's segue on, into diving deeper into the love and lust conversation. I know we got a lot more notes and stuff to talk about. Um, but I do just want to make this point about that line. Love always wants the best for the beloved, while lust merely demands satisfaction for itself. So I think that's perfect for me to talk about, selfishness versus selflessness. Because love is selfless, right? And we're about to really get into what First Corinthians says love is. But selfish versus selfless, like I think a lot of me transitioning into being more selfless was still rooted in selfishness uh, for a good period of time. So I was doing selfless things for an underlying belief that it would result in selfish gain. And I think that so many people experience that in their life. And so I think it's just a question of, you know, and this goes back to the love and lust. Like, if you are truly, you know, doing it out of what's best for the beloved, that's selfless. It's not about you. But you may be saying, I'm taking this action, what's best for her, for later on you plan on some selfish gain coming, or that's kind of your motive, underlying motive, that is really causing you to take the selfless action. And that's why we're really talking about the condition of the heart in this, because it's like you have to directly tie your actions to the condition of your heart. Your heart has to be properly conditioned in these scenarios. And so when you're taking that selfless action, like, and you're the only one who knows deep down. But I just wanted to highlight that because I know I've experienced that in my life, and I think I will continue to experience it. But I think it was more frequent, and I'm lessening the frequency of my selfless actions with truly an underlying selfish motive. I think I'm getting further and further away from that. But I know, as I was transitioning the condition of my heart, I was still even leveraging selfless actions with an underlying motive of selfish gain. And I think that so many people do that. So I just wanted to make people self aware by mentioning that tidbit there.
Absolutely, man. Very important point. Very important point. Um, that deeper condition of the heart. I think there have been many relationships in my past as well that have failed as a result of these two ideas, the love lust and the selflessness, that kind of, they do get paired together,
Yeah.
just because of what they represent, and yeah, super big journey, long journey. Nowhere, it's not done for me either. Like, daily, just step in the right direction, checking myself in certain moments, when it comes to the relationships that I have now, as we'll get into with things like boundaries going forward. Um, but yeah, man, there's other things that definitely contributed to those relationships no longer being a thing, but uh, selfishness was a huge part of it for me as well.
Well, let's dive into to love, how the Bible kind of defines love. I know we are all very, very familiar with lust. We know what that looks like. We understand that in our lives. That's very easy to understand. So I think like really understanding love versus lust is just going to better to help us truly understand, what love is from the biblical perspective. So, when researching for this episode, I think the best thing that I found was First Corinthians right here, 13 verses 4 through 7. And I'll just read it. This is the NIV for anyone who is a biblical scholar and wants to question what we're reading. But it says, love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves. And I think that's just obviously such a true definition, just such a powerful, definition if you really think about it. And we're really about to understand love on a whole new level once we dive into, what marriage really is. Because it's such a cool to see how God relates marriage to his love for us and his love for the church, which in turn is us. So it's just so cool as we dive into that a little bit later, talking about premarital stuff and boundaries. But I guess just when you're first hearing that, I'm sure you've heard this before, but when you're hearing that definition of love, kind of me reading through that First Corinthians, like what thoughts are hitting you about love?
Oh, I think it's just it kind of describes the fruit of the spirit in a lot of ways too. Like talking things in there about patience, not dishonoring others, not self-seeking. There's that selfishness. Kind of call out again. Not easily angered. Keeps no records of wrongs. I mean, geez, these are just all kind of. I know it's using a lot of examples of what not to be, but then you can then think, all right, well, what can this be? Like, what is the definition of it? Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good verse for anybody. I mean, wherever you're at in terms of your relationship status, you're single, you're dating, in marriage. I think it's a verse that you can take with you and just reflect on, no matter what season of life you're in, and just be like, hey, like, how am I doing when it comes to this? Like, am I maybe getting a little too angry at my significant other? Am I being super impatient with them? Like, and just kind of use this as a barometer for your relationship, wherever it may be. I know, I think AB Aaron Brockett did a good. This was in his last sermon. He definitely mentioned this First Corinthians verse, and he even mentioned like it's read at a lot of weddings. Like I think on that special day between two people, like this is the verse that gets read by the priest or the commencement person, whoever it is that's officiating the wedding. So it's just very, very important, well-known verse out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, like, just thinking about Jesus, like how Jesus walked. It's been something like, and there's a verse, I can't remember where this verse is. I was literally just writing it the other day. I don't know how, I don't remember, but it says like, if you don't know love, you don't know God, because God is love. Like that is the verse. I wish I could quote it. I'll find it, and bring it back up. But just thinking about that, like if God is love, like then that's what we're placed to spread and represent, at least a piece of it. And so I think about that in my interactions. And there's even an example at the gym not too long ago where I was playing some basketball with a guy, and this guy was not happy about losing. And he did some things to some other guys that I did not like. I'll just leave it at that. But and then carrying on, he ends up fouling somebody, and he's just kind of making this pickup basketball game at a Vasa gym bigger deal than it really was. And it started to get to me, right? And because I'm a competitor, and so I'm getting frustrated, and I end up just like walking off the court, like saying some sort of side-handed comment. He had been chirping me the whole game, all these games. And I hadn't said anything. I just kept my mouth shut and kept playing, as I should have. And then it got to me. I hit my bar. I said just a side-handed comment. It wasn't anything bad, but just told him, he wasn't content with losing, essentially. And he didn't like that. So we start elevating our voices. We're not really screaming at each other, but definitely getting angry. And I just leave. I just knew that was the next best thing. If I don't leave, him and we're going to be scrapping on this court. And that's just not what I wanted, of course. So I end up just walking out of the gym. I just walked straight over after I said that comment, picked up my stuff and walked out. And that was the best thing, that was the best thing I could have done, was just completely remove myself from the situation. But the reason I say this is because, I was even upset with myself for saying anything at all, because I often compare my actions to, like, it's kind of that like cheesy thing of like, what would Jesus do? But I think about that because, we're supposed to, like, he walked perfect. We're supposed to emulate that. Like, that is our vision or bar. We're never going to hit it. But so I was thinking about that, and I was like, Jesus would not have handled that situation that way. He would have just met this guy with an just extreme amount of love and just support and just light and just carried on with the game. And, maybe even to the point where the guy isn't so frustrated as he's sitting there trying to play basketball in a Boston gym that doesn't matter. Like, I maybe could have been a life for that guy that day. Not saying he needed it. I hate when like Christians like say that, like, oh, I'll be praying for that guy. Like, that's just condemning that guy. Like, it's, putting yourself on this high horse similar to the Pharisees. But yeah, I just was thinking about my actions, reflecting on that, because I wish I would have just been that love and trying to be that love in every single situation that I can be, even something of playing pickup basketball at the gym. So I think I really just wanted to highlight that point because, this goes far deeper, far wider than just an intimate relationship. Like, literally that scripture piece saying, if you don't know love, you don't know God. God is love. Like, this means in everything, in all that we do, in the pickup basketball game, on the 96-hour fast when I haven't eaten in 4 days and, I'm getting frustrated there. Like, I still have to embody love. Can't just be hangry, which that was like the funniest thing, that because I used to use the word hangry and allow being hungry to justify short and tempered with people too, because it's just normalized. But on that fast, like, you just can't. This is not an excuse. And so just love goes so much deeper is the point I'm really trying to get across than just an intimate relationship.
Man, I totally, complete seriousness, what you're saying. I don't want you to lose your gym membership, man. Got to keep up those gains. No scrapping on the court.
Hey, I've been known to get in some fights too. Like, I've been in a couple of fights, but one I have been in a fight over a basketball game when I was in high school. We are just playing some pickup basketball at a gym, similar scenario. I've known this kid my whole life. He starts talking, I started talking. He was losing, and I kept talking, and the next thing you know, we were fighting. But yeah, so hey, I leveled up from that experience, man.
Yep. No, it's such a good point. Such a good point how that can apply to relationships outside of one with your significant other. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much bigger than we realize. And I will find that verse. Absolutely. I think the next place I really want to go that I got written down here is just like the flesh. I think just talking about the flesh and just highlighting it, flesh versus spirit is kind of worthwhile in this conversation of lust and love because, ultimately lust is tied to our flesh through and through. It's our fleshly desire. Like, it is not what the spirit desires for us to lean into that flesh. And I've got some scripture around that I'm just going to dive in and read. It says, so I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. So just talking about these opposing forces here of the Spirit and the flesh. They're in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want. So, similar to love and lust, I kind of think about it in that way of like, love is the spirit, lust is the flesh. So it's really helped me to, and I think we may have talked about this episode 1, but identify 2 different versions of myself. The one that's walking in the spirit and the one that's living by the flesh. So that way I can remove emotion from my actions to where, if I were to, for example, blow up on that guy in the gym and end up fighting him or what have you, I can, after that scenario, reflect on that scene and say, man, I gave into my flesh in that scenario. Like I gave in. I didn't walk in the spirit in that example. Like, and so it really helps me to detach my emotions from the scenario, the situation, the sin, the mistake, the regret, whatever it is, and then label it. Was that me walking as the best version of myself in the spirit? Or was that me walking in a lower version of myself, giving into my fleshly desires or my ego in that scenario of wanting to win a basketball game on a Vasa basketball court? Like I was just as guilty as making that game a big deal as he was, at that point. And so, it really helps me to detach those, separate those, remove emotion, and just kind of slot my actions, and know which actions I want to reinforce and live in alignment with. So I think just thinking about these, polar or, contrary forces, contradicting forces here, like it's just helped me to detach, remove emotion, and just, okay, that was me doing that. That was me doing this. So I don't know if you, I know episode 1, we really talked about the vision, and acting in alignment with the vision, building beliefs in alignment. So that's kind of how I think about those. I don't know if you've had a similar mental framework to this or not.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. Um, Helps you stay grounded in the present too, where it's kind of like, hey, like you can recognize that past version of yourself, but you don't necessarily have to live there anymore. So it's like, okay, you can recognize that. Then you can also see the other side of it, which is future person who you're striving to be day in, day out. And then it's like, okay, boom, stay in the present. I know the plan. I know what I want to execute to. And then it's just a matter of walking forward. Absolutely. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, it's I think it's a big mental framework to use, and I think it's a big deal to not deny that the flesh is there. You know what I'm saying? Like I think I've tried to deny it a lot of times. I was just like, oh, that's not me. I know the biggest example in my life is anxiety. That would be a fleshly thing,
Mm-hmm.
a worldly thing. Struggling with anxiety is not walking in the spirit. Um, so it was something where when I was first struggling with anxiety at 16, I just tried to deny it. Even to the point where I was just speaking very poorly of myself, in the mirror. Um, like trying to, there was a stretch there for 6 months where I puked every time I brushed my teeth. Or I just started brushing my teeth in the shower because I was just dealing with so much anxiety. For some reason, when I brush my teeth, like it just gagging and then I'm puking. I don't know why, but my anxiety was like at the worst there. So I'm talking to myself legitimately in the mirror and just like trying to bully myself out of being anxious. Like, this is not you, cussing at myself, what have you. Like, this is not you. This is not real. Just trying to deny that the anxiety was even a thing or even there. And that was such an unhealthy, negative way to go about it. Instead of just accepting it, like, yeah, this flesh is here. This temptation, this lust is here. Like, accept it, get to know it, like, understand it. How's it work? How's it think? Like, how's it feed? And that's another thought I want to go into later, is like feeding the flesh, because I think that is, or feeding lust, because I think that is a very real thing. Um, but how's it work? Like, get to know it, understand the ins and outs of it, so you could best navigate it to walk in the spirit. I think that's been a really helpful tip in my life. Just like, stop denying these things. Let's start accepting them, welcoming them in, bringing them closer, and really getting to know it, so that way I can, best navigate it. I don't know if you've experienced anything like this.
Yeah. I mean, geez, just with lust, just it reminds me of just trying to push it away, like pretend like it's not there. Like when I was caught in that cycle of just going back, every couple of weeks, it was like, all right, just I'll try harder. Like, all right, I'm just gonna pretend like it's not there even more, and then it just comes back even with like a bigger head, like I don't know, more ferocity. I don't even know how to describe it, but it was like that just wasn't the way. Like pretending pretending like the flesh isn't there in these areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think just going into that, the conversation around lust and kind of this roller coaster that you may have experienced. I know I've experienced kind of heading into just lust in general, trying to get out of it at least. It's similar to porn. It's that kind of that revolving door of like, oh, I, watched porn, jerked off, what have you. Man, I'm done with that. You kind of have a good streak, and then you just sit here and you can play this roller coaster game until you change your actions. So like, if you're someone playing this roller coaster game, something's got to change. What you're trying to do right now is not working. I get it. I've been there. I've tried to just, white knuckle through the pinwheel, the roller coaster game. We've all tried to do that. But something has to change. It's only changed for me when an action has changed and when I've just gotten real with myself and said, okay, something else has to go on, has to occur. Something has to change. This is not working. I got to reach out to someone for help,
Yeah.
what have you. And you see that with any addiction, really. Like, people will try to white knuckle through. They'll relapse time and time again. They'll struggle until they're just so beat down, alone, tired of struggling, just withering themselves to near nothing until they're like, okay, I better like tell somebody about this. Or, even in some, drug cases where it's too late, it's too late. So like if you're struggling with porn, like I think if you're in that pinwheel and number one, you haven't talked to anyone, talk to someone. Like I think that would be like the first step. But like some action has to change. Same thing with lust. In the premarital, boundaries of trying not to have sex before marriage and all that. And I'm excited to go into that next. But like same thing there. If you're in that roller coaster there, which I have absolutely been in, like actions have to change. Something has to change. Stop doing the same thing on repeat. But I want to talk about this thought of feeding lust real quick. Did you have something on that kind of?
No, all good.
Cool. I
All
know
good.
you unmuted there, so I thought maybe you had something. But feeding lust, and I think that this really goes back to what we were talking about with the porn rabbit holes too, of like lust grows bigger, and it like needs more food to eat. For example, like like watching different genres of porn, like going down deeper layers of different porn rabbit holes to get stimulated. Like I think in my life, and I'm curious your perspective, but I've experienced the more I just give in and feed it, the bigger it grows. Like the more it demands from me, the more it like controls and takes up. So if I'm not fighting it, it'll just consume me. Like that's something I've really experienced in my life. Going back to watching porn, where it's something where you're feeling that ultimate stress, you're needing that dopamine. You've got some sort of underlying thing that's causing this, absolutely. But there's a day where you've not been watching porn for 2 weeks, let's say, and then one day you just let your guard down. You're like, you know what? Just like once, just I'll just watch it, get it over with. Like it'll be all right. I need to de-stress, go to bed, what have you. So then you end up watching porn. Well, it's like that when you let your guard down and you give in and you choose porn, man, it like becomes hungrier. Like you fed it and it's hungrier. So now you're right back into it. Now you're going even deeper, even bigger, submitting to it. I've experienced that in my life with lust, of just like it being this monster that just as you feed it, it continues to grow bigger. And if you're not, talking about this war going back, if you're not battling that every single day, it's going to just consume more and more and more until, you're at a spot where you don't even feel like you're in control. But it's kind of that feeding it. Is that making sense to you? And have you experienced that too?
Yeah, that's actually I haven't heard of this concept yet, so I'm interested just to listen and hear what you were saying there. But
Shower
I
thought.
think I think it's so not only do you want to starve the flesh, but then I think that's why that First Corinthians verse is so important, because that gives you the food and the nutrients to provide yourself instead. Because I think where a lot of people get into trouble is they just start starving themselves, but guess what? Your body's still going to want something. So you might be able to starve yourself for a couple weeks, couple months, like you're saying, but then there's going to come that day where your brain's just going to keep chipping away at you and try to, whether you want to say it's the devil or not, just try to justify that, like, oh, it'll be okay just to do once.
Yeah.
Like, just try to rationalize the choice. That's why I think it's so important to have that alternate food to provide yourself, and nourish yourself with that. And what's described with love and the fruit of the spirit there is just, I mean, that always outweighs the flesh and lust and the things that we're talking about.
Yeah. And I love what you're saying about, like, almost like growing a plant is kind of what you're saying of growing an identity. Like, what nutrients, what soil are you planting it in? Like, everything there. What sunlight are you giving it? Like, the environment, or what environment are you giving the flesh? Are you starving it? Are you casting it out? Like, what are you doing? Because, and this is a big point that I actually wanted to make in episode 1, but we just had so much to unpack. But it was something to where I would put lust in a growth environment. That way I could blame the environment that I was in. So I would take, this seed, let's call it, of lust, and I would go scroll Instagram looking at the IG girls. And then, so I'm putting that seed of lust in an environment where I know it's going to grow.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, it grows to a point where I got my pants around my ankles. And then after I'm done, I blame Instagram. I don't blame myself, even though I knowingly took that seed and went to Instagram. Knowingly, I was feeding that lust. But if I can just get on Instagram and scroll, that's an action we can all justify, right? Like, if I can just scroll on Instagram, like, oh, Instagram having all these girls on there, like all these naked bikini pictures. Like, one, if you really cultivate your social media feed and are in control of it, it does not have that stuff. Just FYI, Jimmy, whoever's listening. But I used to do that. Like, and then I would blame Instagram, even though I knew the path that I was going. I was putting that lust, and lust is like a bacteria, man. That stuff spreads like wildfire, like crazy. So, like, it's so fast. So I would take that and I would do, other things as well, even to the lust standpoint of going past porn, of having sex, like, going to the party scene, like getting drunk, like doing those things. Like, that is absolutely going to put you in the environment where next thing you know, you're waking up next to a girl or what have you. So, like, I would intentionally put that plant that we're talking about, that seed, in an environment where I knew it was going to grow, but then I would blame the environment that it was in, that I was in, rather than blaming myself, because I didn't want to take ownership over that.
Yeah. I mean, you've brought up a ton of good scripture already. And I'm not gonna be able to quote it perfectly, but goodness, I mean, how many times does Jesus talk about in his teachings about, the bad plant, and you chop it down and you throw it in the fire, like when he's talking about the fruit of the spirit and just the flesh versus the spirit. So I think it just goes into right, like what we're talking about here. Just, hey, like, and you could have certain seeds that you're cultivating really well, and the fruit of the spirit is there. Like, you have really good aspects here, and then you could have other seeds so there could be these things in your life where there's some good seeds that you got going on, and there's some seeds where you're like, hey, like, I need to chop this tree down, rip this seed up out of the soil, and plant a new seed, which is pretty much what we're going into.
And I think the love and lust, what we're talking about today, is understanding why I was planting that seed into the environment I was, like, why I was taking that and going to Instagram. Like, what was the root of that, the root cause of that action. And it's understanding what seeds are good and what seeds are bad. Like, understanding this love versus lust that we're talking about, the layer deeper, the condition of the heart, the insecurities in your life, the things you are struggling with. Like, these are the layers deeper than that are truly going to, let's say, cure you to have a godly marriage, a godly relationship. Which we don't have a godly marriage, but that's what we're building towards, and that's what we're working towards, getting vulnerable here. That's exactly why, selfishly, that's the selfish reason we are both sitting here on this. Is one, I'll be honest, I love researching this stuff, just as much as I love sharing it, because it helps me and fills me up so much. But yeah, so like these are the deeper layers, and I think that understanding this concept of conditioning the heart and love and lust will also help you to identify the seeds, because there's some seeds in your life that are, they're fake seeds, like they're false seeds. You think they're good seeds, you're nurturing them, you're watering them. That seems like a good relationship, but it's really not. And once you start to do the deeper layers of work, you'll realize these things will be uncovered, that this is not a good relationship. This is not a godly relationship. And I've been in that spot. And I know you have as well. So I like to go there for a second, because, I've had lust destroy a lot of relationships for me. Um, and I know you have as well. And I've also had relationships that I've nurtured and thought that they were good, and now, nothing against the other person. This isn't about them. This is about, the condition of my heart in these relationships and where I want to go with my life, God's vision for me. Like, that's all this is about. But, I've nurtured relationships that I thought were fruitful seeds. And then as I grow in my faith, realizing those are not fruitful seeds that I was watering. So, you have any experience of that in your life, of maybe watering these false seeds, or lust really maybe even blinding you to these false seeds? I know that is a truth for me.
Yeah, I think it's so hard. It when you have these false, it's really hard to kind of lift that veil with yourself and look at yourself from that, like, kind of almost like bird's eye view, like we were talking about before.
Yeah.
And just being honest with yourself and being like, dang, like, these actions I'm taking might not be what I should be taking. And you start to think more about it. I think you're just caught with that veil over yourself, over your situation. Definitely been there myself. Come to the realization in certain relationships where those steps weren't necessarily the best ways I can lead, just as the godly man in the relationship, trying to get the train back on the tracks, per se, to what I know, as what we've outlined in here, to be a good relationship pre-marriage and stuff. And I've still had relationships end. So again, going back to that whole, sin has consequences. I think, that just relationships ending, losing someone who I do care about, like, on a level. You get to know a person to a certain extent over the course of days, weeks, months, years, what have you. And then to have that relationship just end, especially when it's contributed to something like this, it hurts. I'm not going to lie. It's definitely a painful experience, but I think in the resulting time, immediate time afterwards, it's been a time for me to really just slow down, like, reflect, look at that situation and be like, okay, let me ground myself in the word, the things we're talking about, reach out to guys like you, the support crew that I have in place, not to walk through it alone, and grow through that experience to prepare myself, hopefully, for another one.
Yeah. I think it's crazy what you're talking about with, kind of removing the veil. It's in lust not allowing you to do that, because it's crazy what happens to relationships when you remove lust. When you remove sex, it's a whole different relationship. I've even experienced that
Right.
many a times. And it was, I'll get vulnerable. There was a relationship that I was in, and it was a long distance relationship. And so I remember we had spent a lot of time together in the beginning, and definitely she was not into faith at all, was not a believer, which is a uphill battle in itself. If someone's listening to this and you are in a relationship with someone who's not a believer, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your life, but I will say the word just instructs us. Look into the Bible about what it says. I'll just leave it at that. Um, I don't believe in my personal experience. Can't imagine being in a relationship with someone who's not a believer. Now that I am in a relationship with someone who is a believer, it's a night and day difference of peace and the strength and the just having someone who turns you to God and strengthens your faith. And I think so often as men we think about being leaders. I hear a lot of strong guys in our circle that say, like I can lead her to faith, or I can lead her, to these things. And it's like, okay, great, man. Like I respect that leadership and I respect how strong you feel you are. But what about you? Like where's she leading you? Like, and it's something where it's just too big of a foundational piece in life to where it's you can't just kind of hope that someone comes around to their faith. Like you can't just kind of wait around for that. I don't believe. I've had many of friends do that, and I've even been in that spot. So something where you just can't wait on that. But going back to what I was saying, long distance relationship, we spent some time, together, a lot of time together in the beginning, and a lot of lust involved in that relationship. She was not a believer, so. But I remember there was even a AB sermon I was watching. Shout out AB, man. I was watching a sermon, and it was talking about how one, we should abstain from sex, and two, we shouldn't be in a relationship with unbelievers. And man, nailed to the cross. I'm with this girl right now, like in person, and I'm watching this sermon, and I was just like, dude, just like convicted in that moment. And it was something where, a few hours pass and I'm right back to lust. I just kind of ignored the sermon and I'm right back to lust, happy in that relationship. I think it's a good relationship. I'm watering that seed, like I said. And then the distance kind of hit, where next thing you know, we're back to being long distance, and, you remove lust. Naturally, God removed the lust from the relationship because you're long distance. Well, it's something that I just had realized, like with the distance, it's like, man, no lust, kind of a whole different, perspective in which you look at someone when you're not, having lust involved, when you don't have sex involved. And it kind of just, removed my liking for that person. I'll just say, like, you just realize you were more so feeding your own lust than you were into that person. Like you were more so just like drawing the dopamine and the contentment from feeding your own ego and lust than you were from drawing like love and security and whatnot from the relationship itself and from that other person. And I think that is a scary, very, very scary thought to think about, of just literally being in a relationship because your flesh is happy. Your flesh is happy, right? Like you're feeding the flesh by having lust and having sex, and you haven't taken off this veil to see if you actually like that person, if you remove lust or not. Like I think that's just a crazy experience I've had and crazy thoughts I've had, and talking to a bunch of guys who've experienced a similar situation.
Yeah, and then I mean, yes, right there with you. Had that exact thing happen in relationships, but on the flip side to that now, like as you heal, transform yourself, transform your heart, live that new life in a set of new lenses. I think and establishing the boundaries you want to have in a relationship before you get into a relationship is huge. And it takes all the pressure off. When you know what your boundaries are, you can set yourself up for success. And when you start dating, even when you start having conversations with girls, it's a completely different conversation. And the interactions, the dates are completely different as a result of that. So I think on the flip side, there's just so much more peace and freedom to dating. At least that's more like I am in a relationship now, but on the dating side, pre-marriage, like, just train. I like, I've appreciated that, kind of flip.
Yeah, dude, I can remember making the decision to abstain from sex for myself when I was single. And then I'd been single for a long stretch. And it was a thing where I was even talking to Andre, and I was like, man, I was like, like this decision, like I'm convicted in this, I feel good in this, but man, I'm kind of worried. Like I feel like I just shrunk my dating pool like quite a bit. Like the flesh is just the devil is just telling me all these lies, like all this stuff. And he goes, bro, it only takes one. He said, sounds like you're just narrowing it down. And I was like, I was like, my man, like that was so good. Like what you're saying with it changes everything because it absolutely does. Like, and you've had more experience, in the dating world than I have. Um, Absolutely. So, you could speak to that more, but I was talking to Joe about it as well. And we were just talking about how one, like, with my thoughts of this is narrowing my dating pool, like, good. Exactly. It's narrowing it down to one. And if you're not with someone who is equally yoked, um, you know, then you can't fully be yourself. You can't be you. If they don't have faith, you can't be you. If you're a man of God and you want to fully embrace your faith, you can't do that if you have someone who is not of their faith. Um, and if you are someone who's maybe listening to this who has someone who's not of their faith right now and you disagree, then what, man, more power to you. Like, cool. But I don't believe you can. If you're being honest with yourself, I don't believe you're fully being yourself if you don't have a relationship that's built on God and you say you are a man of God. Um, so yeah, I think that that's just a big piece of being able to fully embrace who you are in a relationship, because if you can't do that, then like what really is your relationship, and
Yep.
and so I think that just takes us right into our next kind of piece that we have to talk about here is the premarital boundaries, and then talking about before we get into the premarital boundaries, I really want to like define marriage from the Bible, from the godly perspective, because I know for me, my parents got divorced when I was 11. I never really had a healthy example of a marriage in my life. And, divorce rates are off the charts these days. It's just absolutely insane. Not only are the divorce rates off the charts, it's insane what you see inside of marriages today. Open marriages, people are okay with getting cheated on, it seems, time and time again. Like, I'm not saying they are, but like you see a lot of that stuff go on in marriages. At least I have in my life. Like, I haven't had there's very few healthy examples of what a godly marriage looks like. I feel from my perspective, at least what I've experienced. So I just want to get into what the Bible says about marriage. But before I kind of dive into reading here, I just wanted to open the floor for you if you had anything on what I was talking about there.
Man, I think I've seen definitely some examples of what not to do, both personally and just family friends. I also think there's been plenty there now that I'm a part of a church, been a consistent part of a church. I think there's a few examples that I can point to and people I can lean on that have the established, like, hey, this is how to do a relationship all the way through into marriage and even into marriage. So I think there's
Nice.
definitely been both sides. And then I think there's even that in between of just like just people in the thick of it, struggling, maybe having a maybe taking a step they shouldn't have taken, and then having to work with their significant other or what have you. I think there's those types of situations too. So people striving to be, godly and a better version of themselves spiritually. Maybe just coming a little bit short, and we're all human, so it's just kind of, hey, let's figure out how to keep walking the path better next time. So kind of all three of those buckets for me.
Yeah, absolutely can relate, and I think that's so vital. Seeing some people who have a healthy, um, godly marriage. Like, it's a classic case of go find someone who's doing what you want to do and learn from them. Like, that's often said in the business and kind of self development world, but it's the same thing here. Like, go find someone who has the marriage you want to have and learn from them. Like, it's so powerful to have that example that you can literally tangibly see in your life. And it's something to where it's going to be so powerful, as we get married and have children to embody for them. So let's dive into what the Bible says about marriage. So I think the biggest word that I want to highlight is this word of covenant. It's actually something that I got exposed to from Joel. Shout out the Joel Lopez on Twitter. If you don't follow him, go follow him. Hell of a guy, putting out a ton of incredible faith content. Has a marriage that I look up to, has a family that I look up to, ton of whole slew, village of kids he's got going on over there. But an awesome guy nonetheless. So covenant is the word, and a sacred commitment between a husband and wife that mirrors the conventional relationship between God and his people. So covenant essentially means a commitment that we would rather die than break. So that's what marriage in a covenant is in terms of the Bible. Something where you are in a covenant with someone when you get married that says, hey, I would rather die than get divorced or break this covenant. And I think that something so powerful in here is that, it mirrors the covenantal relationship between God and his people. So let me dive into where that's talked about in the Bible. So Ephesians 5:21 through 30. I'm going to read here to really understand marriage. So Ephesians 5:21, and further submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. For wives, this means submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For a husband is the head of his wife, as Christ is the head of the church. He's the savior of his body. The church, he is the savior of his body, the church. As the church submits to Christ, so you wives should submit to your husbands in everything. And there's some more to read here, but I want to stop there for a second, talking about wives submitting to husbands, because I've seen some examples of like husbands bringing this verse up. I actually saw it in it was one of these like where the husband killed the wife, one of those like murder shows or whatever. I can't remember. I think it was with my grandpa, and he had this on. We were watching this, and actually the husband had thrown that Bible verse at his wife in one of the texts that the police were reading in the court case. Like literally used that Bible verse, and I was like, it was like husband sending the wife like the Bible verse saying, you should submit to me, essentially. And I just wanted to stop there and point that out. Like it's saying wives should submit to their husbands, for a husband is the head of his wife as Christ is the head of the church. So if you are not embodying Christ as the head of the church, don't expect your wife to submit to you. Again, I'm not married, but just going based on what the scripture says here, like I think as men, we can't expect our wives to respect and submit if we are not trying to, day to day embody, how Christ is head of the church, like the scripture says here. So yeah, verse 24, as the church submits to Christ, so you wives should submit to your husbands in everything. For husbands, this means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. He gave up his life for her to make her holy and clean, washed by the cleansing of God's world. Man, think about that. God giving up his life for her, husbands loving their wives just as Christ loved the church. Like he gave up his life for her. So that's just powerful to think about, as we're about to talk about seeing her as a sister in Christ and a daughter of God. Like it's a good lens to look at it through. God's sacrifice. He did this, verse 27, he did this to present her to himself as a glorious church without a spot or wrinkle or any other blemish. Instead, she will be holy and without fault. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as they love their own bodies. For a man who loves his wife actually shows love for himself. No one hates his own body, but feeds and cares for it, just as Christ cares for the church, and we are members of his body. So I think what that's kind of saying here, would love your perspective, but husband ought to love their wives as they love their own bodies. So, and then it's going on to say like we feed and we take care of our body, and we don't hate our body essentially. So we should love our wife in that same way, where we should feed and take care of her as we would our own body, trying to keep ourselves healthy. And that will then in turn, she will take care of us. She will submit to us. Like that's kind of how it will go. Like it says, for a man who loves his wife actually loves for himself. So it's like kind of a full circle thing here, talking about marriage, how she will serve you, you serve her, like, and that's just kind of how it goes. You're serving yourself by serving her in a way. And then I think it talks about too is just as Christ cares for the church and we are members of his body. So Christ, taking care of the church, sacrificing his son, doing all these things for us, and we should love in that way, which is a bar that we will never hit. But there's the standard, right? Like there's marriage right there. And I think something else to point out too is Hebrews 13:4. I got right here. Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and the sexually immoral. So I'll let you kind of unpack that Ephesians there and Hebrews if you want. Just give your takes on those.
Absolutely. Jeez. Oh, Ephesians is such a good book. I remember we did a Bible study on that a little while back in the Elevate Squad. But man, just so many. I think we brought up one of the Ephesians verses on the armor last call. So here we are again with some more. I think did Paul write Ephesians, or did someone else write?
I think so.
He did. All right, Paul coming through again, man.
Legend.
Whew. But I think just a really good outline for, again, you want to starve the flesh and your desires when it comes to lust and stuff. And here again is just an example of how to live out a godly relationship, no matter what stage you're in, right? Like that thing about, I know the verbiage itself details like wife, husband, and stuff, but like you could use that as girlfriend, boyfriend, like no matter what stage you're at, I think you can apply that to your life. And I think, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but maybe it'll trigger something with you too. But in that book, Just Do Something, that I was reading, he the author basically kind of mentions how in today's day and age, guys are waiting longer and longer to take responsibility. I think he calls it like adultolescence instead of adolescence. Like people are getting later into their 20s, just not wanting to take on that responsibility when it comes to something like this, and marrying a godly woman, and just not being around the bush anymore, and just like actually committing to something. And I think lust, pornography, it contributes to someone not being able to take that responsibility. But where was my head going with that? I think this outline pretty much just shows like, hey, like, in order for someone to submit to you, like you're saying, for a godly woman to be able to submit to you, like I need to be connected to God, connected to the church. Like that path, it's not just the path for the woman to submit to me. Like, no, there's the responsibility that I have to take, and the thing that's expected of me as well, in order to make the relationship work is pretty much what I was looking for there.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. I think it's just so powerful to consider. And I like that you're saying, it's applicable to our relationships now, even if we're not married. Obviously you're not saying like the sexual stuff, but what he's specifically saying here applies to any relationship. If you are intending on getting married, and if you're listening to this, I know you're dating to get married. Absolutely. So, it is so powerful to see how that applies today, and how that can set us up, for this godly marriage we're trying to build. So let's so now that we've kind of defined and really have a good understanding of marriage being this covenant, how a wife's supposed to submit to a husband, like how it kind of works, from the Bible, not of today's world. Again, like I'll get that across. I really want to get that across. Like today's world, we talked about it in episode 1. Like that is not the metric in which you should be measuring your life or gauging your successes, let's say. It's all should be off of this truth. So now that we understand what the Bible says about marriage and how it should go down, let's talk about the premarital game. Before I just dive into any scripture, is there anything that, from your perspective that you want to share premaritally? Do you think we should maybe walk through our experience or dive into the scripture first?
And I'd say one big thing just for me to touch on, and I brought it up in the Bible study actually the other day, or yesterday morning. But just when it comes to something like this, for me, like there can be seasons of good that God blesses you, but I think in order to get to some of those seasons of blessings and the fruit that we've talked about, you got to go through seasons of suffering. And it can hurt, like denying your flesh. I'm not sure where it's talked about in the Bible, but it definitely is. Just it can hurt. Like denying your flesh can and will hurt sometimes. And I think that's true. I think that's true in this case. But that being said, I kind of had to get away from the frame of just like, God is taking this away from me. Like this is a hindrance on the relationships I'm going to have before marriage. But no, like God actually wants to bless me, bless any Christian male or girl.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to bless us more than we know. So this isn't a hindrance. It's actually a blessing, but we have to be able to reframe our minds to be able to see that.
That was a massive, what you're saying right there was I want like everybody listening to really hear what you just said, because that was a massive breakthrough for me in my faith. I can remember where I was standing once I understood that concept, that this is not a sacrifice. It's a setup. Like it's a setup to have a godly marriage. It's a setup for how we should live life. Like God is not trying to put rules and restrictions on our life. That's not what he wants for us. Like he wants us to have, everything that we desire. Like he wants us to have an amazing, glorious life. Like, and this is his instruction manual on how we can do that. And like once I started framing the Bible that way, it really changed everything. And I think that people getting into this, they're like, wow, this is a lot of sacrifice. Yeah. From a worldly perspective, yeah, 100%. But from a godly marriage, is this a sacrifice? No. This is the setup to have a godly marriage. You're sacrificing a lot more by keeping sex in your premarital relationship. Like you're sacrificing a lot more by not addressing, this root cause of lust in your life and the condition of your heart. Like that's actually what you're sacrificing. So, dude, that's just such a big point. And I'm so glad you brought that up. That mindset shift changed everything for me moving forward once I understood that this is the manual to live life at the highest level. We talk about that with Elevate, life at the highest level. Like if you want to do that, the Bible is the manual to do so. Man, that's got me fired up because that changed everything. It really did. Like I said, I can remember the spot I was standing in once I fathomed that point. So I appreciate you sharing that, dude. That's such a big point. Such a big point. Let's just dive into the scripture, because we've talked a lot about lust and such inside of a relationship. So the scripture I pulled here is 1 Corinthians, going back to 1 Corinthians, kind of where we started, 6:12 through 20. Pulled the NLT for this one because this one I kind of like go based on the versions that really make the most sense to me. I'll check out a couple and be like, okay, that one I think would be best to get the point across. So that's kind of how I do it. I don't know if people will agree with that or not, but that's how I operate. So here we go. 1 Corinthians 6:12. You say I am allowed to do anything, but not everything is good for you. And even though I am allowed to do anything, I must not become a slave to anything. I think that's a great point right there.
Mhm.
You say food was made for the stomach and the stomach for food. This is true, though God someday will do away with both of them. But you can't say that our bodies were made for sexual immorality. They were made for the Lord, and the Lord cares about our bodies. And God will raise us from the dead by his power, just as he raised our Lord from the dead. Such a powerful verse there. Don't you realize that your bodies are actually parts of Christ? Should a man take his body, which is part of Christ, and join it to a prostitute? Never. And don't you realize that if a man joins himself to a prostitute, he becomes one body with her? For the scriptures say the two are united into one. But the person who is joined to the Lord is one spirit with him. Run from sexual sin. No other sin. It's so cool how he's kind of elevating sexual sin here. No other sin so clearly affects the body as this one does. For sexual immorality is a sin against your own body. Don't you realize that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who lives in you and was given to you by God? You do not belong to yourself, for God bought you with a high price. So you must honor God with your body. I think a lot of people use that last kind of tidbit there from a physical standpoint. Like you honor God with your body. You talk about the physical health. When you really, we get context here. It's not that the physical, honoring God with our body isn't important. I believe in that wholeheartedly. But, you get the context here and it's talking about the sexual immorality. But one point I really want to highlight, and then I'll give you the floor for your perspective on this. I mean, there's so much to unpack here, but the scriptures say the two are united into one. So it says, verse 16, and you don't realize that if a man joins himself to a prostitute, he becomes one body with her. For the scriptures say the two are united into one. And the two are united into one is referencing Genesis 2:24, where it says, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife. The two are united into one. And so when I thought about sex from that standpoint, and then it goes on to say how we're supposed to be united with the Spirit, with God, in one in that sense. But when I thought about sex from that standpoint, like, uniting into one, like, it changes your whole mindset on sex, really, when you think about it like that. Like, it's no longer like even for pleasure. Like, sex, the purpose of sex is to unite into one. Like, if that is the purpose, and if you think about that, what really blew my mind is if you think about having a child, what are you doing there? You're taking two and you're uniting them and creating one. And I mean, it's just so beautiful how the Bible does this. It's about to put me in tears, but it's just so beautiful how it does that. But it's no longer about hooking up, feeding the lust, or doing any of that kind of what we've talked about in the past in this episode. It's more about uniting into one, and sex being that. And so I think that like when we can really understand that and fathom that, and then the whole having a kid really just like when I was reading this just blew my mind thinking about that. But yeah, it's just, man, it's got me on fire thinking about this stuff. But I mean, anything you got from this? Again, I know there's so much here that we could probably riff for another hour. But what's your take here?
Yeah, I think big thing for me is just like what you're talking about, that idea of uniting. I think just sex in and of itself, not just being a physical act, that spiritual aspect to it that Paul outlines here, and just what it really represents, all the way from, I mean, geez, you got that verse in Genesis, you got the beginning, and you got post Jesus, like, and these things are coming together,
So cool.
and saying the same thing. But man, just to like, something freaking blew my mind. I was listening to a Tom Segura, Bert Kreischer bit, and dude, love those guys. Just and so much of the content they put out. But they actually did an episode with an adult film actress, Adriana Chechik. I don't know if you've seen that episode or just seen bits of it.
Doesn't seem like an input for me, brother.
No. And so I had just, they had her on really to kind of like interview her about her experience in that industry as an actress. And I tuned into a little bit of it, and then I was even kind of like at the point where I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm good here. But just like some of the, you talk, look at yourself, building the brand, the Elevate brand, and just what that name and your business, what it embodies, what it represents, what you want it to represent. She's doing the same thing. She's building a brand with her body. And just the way she was talking about sex and the acts that she performed and just the things that she did as an actress, it was just such a worldly, physical description of everything. Like, I was like, this is not what God intended this to be. Just either, like, she's either doing it for her own benefit, building her brand, obviously there's the money side to it with that as well. So it's like, okay, like being able to elevate herself financially. I was like, this is so, and once I kind of really let that sink in and just have those thoughts, I was like, yeah, I'm going to turn this off. But, that was just a huge eye opener for me. Just in terms of that industry, how all of that stuff is viewed, like getting paid based on certain acts that you perform, how many people are present. Like, it was just like, okay, that's what Jesus is needed, man. Everywhere out there.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's pretty much a thought I had with all this.
And think about, idolizing money in that way too. Like, if you're willing to idolize money and put it above God, look at the other things you'll sacrifice,
Right.
Because, why is she doing that? Like, she's doing it for money, I would say, and maybe for attention, I guess. But, probably started out as money, I would imagine.
Right.
Because, you don't start out, with all that fame, I guess, which we even want to call it that. I don't even know. Such a weird thing. But, so it just shows like how powerful of an idol money can be when you put it over God. Like, look at the things, she's willing to sacrifice. Like, and man, like, God bless her, like, by the grace of God, the craziest part is she can still be saved. Like, like, isn't that so cool? Like, she's still redeemable too. Like, and, me too. Like, I'm not judging her or saying I'm on any level different than her. We are all on the same level here. So,
yeah.
But it's just so cool to see. Like, you can see someone who's just so involved in that world. And it's just like, I don't know, it makes me smile. It's just like, man, like, God's still got a plan for her life, like he'll still be there when she needs it. Like, he's got her. So it's just cool to think about, but it's crazy, man. It is absolutely crazy. Just how, and a lot of people are talking about the end times, revelations, so much pride and ego in today's world. People being so self-absorbed, and it's crazy. Like, you see these, you called them female actresses, whatever, porn stars.
Sure.
I liked how you phrased that. And actually, something we came off of episode 1, and you always refer to as pornography. Like, you're like, I don't know, like, one, how you carry yourself plays into that, and then 2, it's almost like your respect for it. Like, you do have a level of respect, like, not in like you respect it, but like you respect like the boundaries of it. You know what I'm saying? If that makes any sense at all. But
I was about to say you're a lot more raw than I am. I try to use I don't know if it's politically correct or just like trying to keep you on YouTube sort of deal. You're just like, nah.
Yeah, bro. Oh man, I was talking to a guy the other day, and he was talking about like the whole trans scene, and I won't even go there, but he was saying like, yeah, he's like, we're tiptoeing around our words because we might get, YouTube like will censor that stuff, and I was like, I was like, I didn't even consider getting censored here. Like, this is just me putting my faith in the Lord here, man. If he wants it censored, I guess it'll get censored. If it does, it does. Like God's got a plan for these episodes. Like, let's jump on, let's get real. And if we get censored, we get canceled, whatever, man. We'll put our faith in the Lord with this one. So
Right.
that was something that was funny because he said that, and I was like, I didn't even consider. And then I was like, dude, I literally titled that episode "Overcoming Porn." Like, I was like, oh God. I was like, we're done. Oh man, that was funny. But going back to what we're talking about here, our bodies were made to join as one, and join as one in the Holy Spirit. Like, I love that. And I'm thinking, like, if lust is involved, that can't happen. That's what I'm thinking. And I don't know why that's in my mind, but sin, it distances from God. Like, it's a separator, let's say. So if we're gonna join as one, I'm thinking, like, if lust is involved, that can't happen. That's why I think my thoughts are coming to that. And I actually had a unique question that I wanted to share. I got a few points I want to share of just my experience with this, and then how I've really fought to combat the premarital boundaries and where those boundaries are. That's really what I want to cover. But I had a unique question. So I'll go into my experience. So with the premarital just roller coaster that I've been on of trying to abstain from sex, made the decision, get into a relationship, realize that saying you're going to do something and doing something is two totally different things in faith. I think a lot of times we think about, like, oh, we're not ready to make this promise to God yet. That's not how it works. You're just expected to live away. Whether you do that or not, it doesn't matter when your words come out and say that you're going to do it. Like, that doesn't mean anything. I hear that a lot of times. Like, guys are like, oh, I'm not ready to, like, promise that to God or whatever. I'm like, you're either doing it or you're not. Like, there's not, like, some sort of verbal thing. And that verbal thing also, I will say, doesn't mean anything. So for anyone listening, they're like, oh, I'm about to verbally make this decision and tell people, like, guess what? You're still about to fight on the other side of that verbal commitment that you're going to make. So I make this verbal commitment, get into a relationship, time to put my money where my mouth is. Boom, slip, mistakes, crossing boundaries that I know I shouldn't be crossed. And, my girlfriend on the same page with me. We're both embodying this decision and trying to live it out. But lust is a bigger demon than we had realized in both of our lives. So it's time to fight, right? It's time to gear up for war. And so we start doing that. And one thing that I will say is, like, having someone who is on the same page is vital. Vital. I would not be on this episode today recording this if I did not have someone who is on the same page. The level of understanding, the level of faith, the level of presence, the level of security you need to fight this war that is lust, I think it's impossible without the Lord. I truly do. So, like, I'm just going to put that out there. But so we have had a really good communication and understanding and an acceptance of this in our lives. It's not something where we try to deny it, say that's not there, that's not a thing, we're abstaining from sex. It's something where okay, it's here, it's real, let's try to understand it, and let's best fight it, just like everything else. So it was a roller coaster. We're doing good. Similar to, I talked about the porn, slip up past a boundary, kind of in that pinwheel. Okay, change in action. Now we're in a new pinwheel, but the duration of time in between was getting longer. So it's a good sign, right? Where we're going weeks, months without doing it. So duration of time gets a bit longer. And that was really good. But really, two big things that have helped me the most in this battle, and I'm convinced it's over. Obviously, I'm not letting my guard down. I'm going to continue to fight, but I'm convinced, we're on the other side of this thing, if you will. So I get hit early on with a sermon from my man, P.D. Kinder, and he talks about these 3 R's, and this one really, really helped us. So 3 R's to enforcing godly boundaries. Number 1 was restraint. Restraint leads to reward. So I talked about this in episode 1. So often we think about the consequences of our sin, but we don't think about the reward of abstaining from that sin. So you must think about the reward. Why would you climb the mountain if there's nothing on the other side for you? Like, think about the reward, tangibly consider it. So a godly marriage, the relationship you're trying to live out, getting into heaven, like think about the reward time and time again. So restraint leads to reward. Number two was remind. And he really used a scenario of a parent reminding a kid, you know, and I think I even talked about this in episode one, maybe, but don't color on the walls, don't eat that, don't touch that, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. Like, parents will sit there and have to do that until they are blue in the face for years. As we are, young toddlers, infants, whatever, as we're growing up, they have to constantly remind them of boundaries. Don't draw on the wall. Don't touch the stove. Those are all boundaries in their life to protect them, to give them the best setup to live the best life. Same thing with the Bible. These are boundaries to protect us, to set us up to live the best life. So we must remind ourselves the boundaries. Where are they? Where are those boundaries? And we're about to talk about that. I really want to get that across. I know we're going really long here, but man, so much good stuff. So I want to talk about where we found that boundary is, yourself and myself included. So remind. So what that looks like actionably for us is including it in our prayers in the morning, before meals, before we go to bed. Like, we're including the reminders in our prayers, talking about our boundaries, talking about the rewards, etc. And then I think this third one, which we've definitely talked about, is releasing that regret. Um, Coming out of that dark corner. When you go into that dark corner, you're not hiding anything. God sees it. He knows it. Lean on your people, communicate with your people, have those strong relationships built in. It's where you can, I can call up Matt and say, hey man, we had this mistake. I don't have to struggle with that alone. I got people around me, and I've got her as well. We communicate about it immediately. Mistake happened, man. We know we shouldn't have done that. Instead of just trying to silence it, put it in that dark corner, let it distance us from God, distance us from each other, and then, just feed, kind of what we talked about, feed itself and grow bigger. We just release that regret, have that conversation, pray for forgiveness, reminded the boundaries, like do that cycle again. And that has been a big one. And then another actionable thing that we have done is, and this is similar to remind, but it's like a tangible reminder, intangible barrier. And this is really something I got from James Clear. He says, never be too far away from a good idea. Atomic Habits. If you haven't read it, you should definitely go read it. So never be too far away from a good idea. And I kind of took that into my health coaching, which you've experienced working one-on-one with me. I took that into that at the time when I read it. And it was something where, if you're trying to help someone stop snacking, it's like, just take the snacks out of the house. You're too close to a bad idea. So never be too far away from a good idea. Put healthy snacks in place, like things like that. So he said, for example, like he would have a book nearby everywhere, on the nightstand, on the coffee table, on the couch, like book. So he'd read. So what we did, God. So we fix our eyes on the Lord, putting wall art in our place, a cross on the wall, scriptures on the wall, other things that really point us to God, personal things that point us to God. I'm about to get a cross necklace to wear as well. So that's another thing, like another barrier there, where if I'm wearing that, where are you going in the bedroom if you're wearing a cross necklace? Probably not very far. Just say that. And another big thing is putting after we make the bed in the morning, putting a Bible, one of my extra Bibles, in KJV, man, something, don't even need to get into that one, but one of my extra Bibles on the bed. So, when you come into bed, you got to move a Bible out of the way if you want to lay down. Like, good luck doing anything. If you got to move a Bible out of your way, you pick up the Bible to move it to have sex? No, you're just not going to do that. So just these barriers that are physical reminders of God in our lives. And those have really helped us a ton, and those have leveled out. And it's something now where I kind of got the mindset of like, let's not wait, for that pinwheel to happen. Like, instead of waiting for us to make a mistake and then we try to course correct, let's try to be proactive and continue into course correct. What else can we do? What else can we do? What else can we do to make sure that this doesn't happen? So there's kind of my, vulnerable experience. Curious, just your experience. I know you got a bit of a different story with this. If you want to dive into sharing that, brother.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the big thing I just can add love, appreciate you sharing, and the things that you got going on. I know those 3 R's are something that was new to me back at the Steel when you first told me about it. So it's something that I'm still just working to implement and use as a tool, like you're saying. Have that never be too far away from a good idea, and concept. I would say, I would just say the communication is going to be the key, and boundaries can look different depending on the relationship that you're in. Like the boundaries that I have in my current relationship are different than the boundaries that I had in my last relationship. And that's just a matter of like, hey, like
learning.
Right. And just look like, yes, learning. And then just, hey, like the other person is another person. Like I could come in with a whole set of like what I think the boundary should be. But then it's a matter of like, you start talking with the other person, and then you both come to a decision on what the best path forward is going to be. It's not like I'm just asserting just my boundaries on the whole situation. Like I'm treating the other person like another human being, and like respecting what that decision, may want to be. I get, gotten the question a few times from guys, just about like, oh, what's allowed, leading up to it, like touching and kissing and stuff like that, and I'm kind of like, look, like that's between you and the other person. Obviously we want to go to scripture in these cases as well to kind of lay the foundation for us, but in some of those areas where it may be a little more murky, not clearly defined, like sex is defined in the Bible, I think that's up to you and the other person. So, that's where I'm talking, like I might have an idea of like what's okay, what's not okay. You might start to get into a relationship with someone else and they might be like, heck no, we're not even getting close to what you thought was okay. And it's like, then you got to check yourself, and it's like, oh, okay. And you kind of, you have two doorways. You can be like, all right, am I going to show that love with this person and respect where they're coming from, want to grow with them? Or is it going to be a more lust of, dang, I wanted my way, that selfish mindset? And you go down that road instead. So I would just say communication is the big key. And I love, it's not that just one-time conversation either. Like, as I'm finding, it is a just frequent discussion with the other person. Just praying. Prayer is a huge one for us as well. Just even before we go to bed, wake up in the morning, just praying together, and yeah, just taking some time to really reflect on that, remind ourselves, like you're saying, of that reward, and that also allows us to release the regret that we'd have at any point. So
Sure.
love it, man.
So what you're saying about turning into scripture, I know when you said that, somebody's probably like, well, what does scripture say? So I got some scripture here for anyone wondering, that I think is kind of the best way to understand this and really go about this. But it would say, this is Matthew 5:28, and this is the NLT. But I think this is the best way to try to understand where the boundary's at, and how far, you said this episode 1, how far are you willing to go? So hear this, Matthew 5:28-29. But I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So, I mean, if you're wondering, and then there's another piece here, but if you're wondering where the boundary's at, I think the boundary is as soon as your thoughts turn to lust. Now, where's that at? I think you got to be real with yourself. In my experience, it was us trying to find that boundary, and playing the middle ground, knowing that sex is off limits, but still playing the middle ground. And we just realized that this middle ground is breeding lust. It's an environment that's breeding lust, like we had talked about in the beginning. And if we can't be in this middle ground, and not breed lust, we're not going to rid our lives of lust, as we go into marriage. So like we need to put the boundary in a place where it doesn't ever turn to lust. So second piece here, so if your eye, even your good eye, causes you to lust, gouge it out and throw it away. So that question of just like how far are you willing to go? Here's what it says in Matthew. Here's what Jesus says in Matthew. So if your eye, even your good eye, causes you to lust, gouge it out and throw it away. So something to just consider there. But so really, where I found the boundary was for us is even a kiss that goes past just a kiss of affection. Like if it goes into a lustful thought, really. And where that is. Like as a guy, when your mind hits that switch, let's call it, and you're ready to rock. Like where that's at for you. So I think it's just being real with yourself on this boundary. And I played the game of justifying the middle ground time and time again, going into that, and everyone's probably got to do it for themselves. It's one of those things where they say money can't buy happiness, but everybody's got to find out for themselves. Might be a case like this, but I think eventually you will land on a spot where anything past the kiss is breaking a boundary. At least that's what I've experienced, and I know some other guys have experienced. But curious, just your take on this verse and your take, just where your boundary is at, if you're willing to share that, brother.
Yeah, for sure. I know we had this verse in reserve on the last call, but we kind of went down King David Bathsheba territory instead. So I'm glad we were able to get into it. But I think I'd even mentioned on the call when AB was given this sermon at Trader's Point, he reads that, what you just read, and then he goes, I'm going to paraphrase it, but he's basically like, how far are you willing to go? Gouge out your eye, chop off your hand. As guys, we should probably all be chopping off the thing that nobody wants to chop off or whatever, something like that. And it's kind of like, it goes to show, just how important it was to Jesus that he felt like he needed, he goes to such verbiage to describe something like this, and is reiterated by Paul later, when he was talking about in Ephesians, when you were saying, run away from this, there is no other sin that's worse for your body. I think those two things just go to show like, hey, like how serious we need to be taking this. But yeah, I've talked a lot about with King David and his crew and those guys, just the almost like the make out to sex train. And just like that progression.
That slippery slope.
Right. The slippery slope that ends up leading to sex. So I think you outlined it perfectly, man. I think we all know as guys when certain things start to get to, and I'm sure girls get the same way too. We're human, but just being the dude, there definitely comes the point where where you're like, okay, like clothes start coming off, what have you, like you're just like, all right, like things are gonna go to a place if we don't kind of get a grip on this soon enough. So yeah, I love what you said when you said all that stuff.
And I got a unique question that I think we'll probably use to close this out here. And I actually got this from a friend just the other day. We were talking about this conversation, where the boundaries are, the difference between love and lust, etc. And he said, because for context, I'm in a relationship that, we're definitely getting married. Like there's no doubt about that. We're both absolutely convicted in that. So he said, well, like, what are you waiting on then? Like, why keep, struggling with this or battling this? Like, why not just get married and open the door? Like, And I told him, I said, I don't think that would solve anything. I said, I think lust can still exist in a marriage. I said, I think you can still, even though you're married to someone and maybe biblically the boundary is there, just because I'm married to her doesn't mean I can't look at a woman with lust, like and objectify her. I can't,
Yeah.
you can still use your wife as an object
Yep.
to for self pleasure. Like it's still not falling underneath the definition of love. That selflessness we referred to in the beginning. To love is what's best for the beloved. Lust is merely just demanding self satisfaction. Like that can still exist in a marriage, I believe. So that's kind of what I share with him is like one, I think God, I mean, I know God has this set up for a reason. This is intentional, this season of going through and having to really find discipline and control over lust in our bodies. And yeah, I really think that getting into a marriage, lust can still exist. So that scares me even more. Now that we're married and what I shared in Hebrews 13:4 about the marriage bed should remain pure, like that scares me even more of getting into a marriage and lust still existing. So I think that this is like the, season of just growth and challenge and finding discipline over that. And for me though, man, like the more I've talked about it and thought about it, like you think building your body is hard? Like try abstaining from sex. Like you think like I don't believe there is any discipline and I could be wrong, as I continue to experience life. I may be eating these words one day, which humble me if so, but I'm not sure there's any discipline greater than this one, than this lust. So something to consider. But yeah, that was kind of my answer to that question. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I thought it was just a unique question to share. And I didn't know that there was such thing as like Christian humor. But I came across like a meme not too long ago. I don't know if someone sent it to me or what, but it was like something about Christians, like is a joke about Christians, like how they move so fast and get married so young for this exact reason.
Mm.
I didn't grow up in the church, so I didn't know that was a thing. Apparently, I'm getting like exposed to this whole thing, but it was a joke. And that question, I was like, huh, that must be a real thing. And it kind of opened my eyes to, lust even within a marriage. Like, because I can't imagine if I would have rushed to getting married. I can imagine the monster of lust, what that would have grown into within, my marriage if I
Mm.
hadn't, gone through this season of refinement. So I don't know. That's a scary thought, though. But I didn't know that was a thing. I don't know if you are aware of this Christian humor.
A little, a little. I mean, geez, I would say it's that balance between like being intentional, but then also recognizing that like you are prepared for the next season that you're about to step into, right? Like, I think there's definitely something to be being said about like you and your girl, like you're intentional, right? You both know like, hey, this is it. We do know we're gonna get married at some point, like that intentionality, but also then not rushing the process because even I love that you brought this up because I thought about it while we in a little while back in the call, but I just like we got rolling on other things and it just dropped out of my head. But I'm glad you brought it back. I always think of Dumbledore, just like you ever see Harry Potter pulling the thoughts out of their head and dropping it in that little pool for him and Harry to like go and see. Like I always think about that with this stuff. Anyway, random. But just love that you brought it up. I would argue that if you rush to get married, just so you can do that, you're not addressing that underlying condition.
Yeah.
So this is exactly what you talked about, where it's like I don't even know if you can say it like the selfless act of marriage for the selfish gain of, oh, now bedroom's free reign, we get to do whatever we want. Like it's like, oh, like you could even do something like that. So I think it's a really great point that you brought this up, and I'm glad we were able to chat about it for sure.
Yeah, dude. I'm glad you brought it back to that selfish, because that's the truth, 100%. It's crazy, man. Like it's crazy, and then it's almost like lust is the reason you're married. Like lust is in control of that marriage. Like in what we had talked about before of lust kind of being a veil, like that you can't uncover, to where you can literally be in a relationship because your lust is getting fed, and that's what makes you, falsely think you're happy and secure till you uncover that, and it becomes a whole new relationship. It really does. So it's crazy to think about, man. But I really want to encourage someone. I think there's somebody listening to this who may be in a relationship that is wanting to make that decision to abstain from sex, and I just want this to be like your sign to just do it. Make that decision, have that hard conversation. Remove that veil, because like Matt and I have both shared, and many other guys that I've talked to have experienced, when you remove sex from your relationship, it does become a whole new lens, a whole new relationship. You have to communicate on a whole new level. You have to work a lot harder, it seems. But you know why you're doing it, and what you're building. That restraint is going to lead to that reward. So I just want to challenge you guys, if you're listening to this too, if this is something you're feeling called to do, like answer that call, make that decision, and, you know, be ready for what's potentially behind that veil. I've had a lot of friends who've had to break up in their relationships. I know Gabe, for example, is with his lady for 8 years. They get engaged. They stop having sex. A month later, they call off the engagement. Like, there's a massive, and I'm not here to share Gabe's stuff, but I know he would be happy with me sharing this. But there's like a massive thing there of just like, he removed that veil, stopped, pacifying, foundational truths that he wasn't happy with in his relationship with sex, kind of a band-aid there. And here you go. Now he's a month in, and they called off the wedding. So it's crazy what can happen when you remove sex. And I think that everyone needs to experience this. Like, you need to remove sex to truly like get to know that person, truly love that person. Like, I think it is so, so vital. So yeah, I mean, incredible episode here, bro. Appreciate you jumping on, willing to get vulnerable. This is definitely not the end to you being on the Raw Faith series by any stretch, bro. I know we got so many things to record, man. It's something where I'm so excited about this that like I'm considering just like pumping as many episodes out as possible. Like I may start recording like one a day, but I mean, I love researching for them. Like, it fills me up so much. I learn so much. I love getting vulnerable. And I just know there's people listening to this or are going to listen to this as we continue to grow it that are just going to be extremely grateful and potentially even find God through this series. So it's powerful, man. But I appreciate you and your vulnerability, brother. Anything in closing thoughts that you got?
Man, dude, I just appreciate you, appreciate the platform, that sign you got up above you, the community of dudes that we got, that you started. So shameless plug. If you're looking for a group to support you, hold you accountable, not only just when it comes to the things that we're talking about, but the fitness side, the other things that Elevate holds true to its values, then reach out to Matt. Obviously myself, as well. I can help answer any questions, just being in the community, as someone who lives it and breathes it. So if you got any questions, reach out to us, but we'd love to have you in there as well.
How long you've been in there for? I mean, pretty much the start, like 2 years now.
I want to say it was like you started training me in like January last year. And I think you extended the invite maybe like March, April
I
timeline.
don't know
So
why I
it's
didn't
been,
do it right away. That was ignorant.
yeah, it's all right.
But yeah, 2 years basically. So I mean, that's just crazy to think about. But I like just getting that across, like, because for someone considering joining, like, you're a guy who's been in there for 2 years. Like, it's crazy to think about, man. But I appreciate you, brother. Elevate would definitely not be what it is, and I would definitely not be who I am without you believing in me since day one, brother. So I'm grateful for you. Grateful for everybody listening. Appreciate you guys just lending an ear to our vulnerability, and let's just keep growing. Let's keep chipping away at this whole faith thing, man.